Just off rip, I think books that cover hauntings or possessions have an unfair advantage in being qualified as like a modern Gothic tale. Because obviously there's an implied supernatural element to any kind of haunting, and because we're looking at like a modern times haunting, there's always the question of someone's mental health or their awareness of mental reality. And then lastly, like a haunting and a possession implies ghosts, which means we're dealing with some sort of human mortality. Potentially 3 of the 9 Gothic elements almost immediately present. Not all of the time, but pretty reliably you can count on those 3. Which means when I pick something up with a title like The Haunting of Room 904, I'm always hoping for something deliciously Gothic. And really fearing that the book has marketed itself off of these hallmarks, but isn't gonna deliver on all it's promised to me. And unfortunately with these like possession, haunting kind of stories, you usually don't know that you're not gonna get any payoff until like halfway through, so it's kind of like a crapshoot if I'm gonna enjoy this sort of book or not. But a little bit of a spoiler alert here, I love The Haunting of Room 904, and you can check out just like a standard review of it in my April reading wrap up here. This is one of those books that I read sight unseen for the Women in Horror book group. You guys already know I loved it, but did I find it satisfyingly Gothic? Starting with number 1, Elements of Horror. Stakes-wise, people are being scared, they're losing sleep, they're getting injured, and it's possibly going to escalate into death if Olivia doesn't step in and do her medium thing to solve. Which immediately starts us with the horror of the unknown and the supernatural. We don't know what these ghosts are, we don't know what the rules are, we don't know why they're doing what they're doing, or what heights they could get to, but we do know it could be real bad. And Olivia is doing like that classic medium trope that you'd see something in like a Spielberg's Poltergeist or like a Insidious movie, or even like real world example are the frauds Ed and Lorraine Warren. They put on a great show even if they weren't very truthful. And I enjoy that presentation of a medium quite a bit. Also, I really like that extra element of authenticity in Olivia's character because a lot of times these mediums are borrowing from cultures, traditions, and practices that are not their own. Like with Ed and Lorraine Warren, they borrow a lot from Catholicism, but they are not Catholic, and even if they were, only Catholic priests can do these rites. As much as I love Spielberg's Poltergeist, there's like a whole bunch that's like appropriative in that story, even with the medium. I think perhaps Insidious is the most neutral of these stories, and even then Elise is borrowing some techniques that are not really from her culture or that she has right to. Even within this narrative, Olivia kind of addresses that element, talking about whether or not she has a right to these practices, where she learned these practices, the sort of ongoing debate about who can and can't do exorcisms and why. I liked that detail. I love that nitty-gritty stuff. I liked that it shows that she had skin in the game, she had risk, she had like a personal investment here. And I think all of that personal investment and all of that like relating back to her as well as relating back to these people who are actually suffering brings extra horror and intensity to the story. Also, I really liked that with these hauntings we weren't focusing on like some kind of ghostly supernatural plane. We're focusing on unresolved issues and the horrors of history. It also kind of brought like this new dimension into the story because a lot of the things that are happening in this story are true and like based on actual real historic events that happened in American history here in Denver or nearby Denver in the case of the Sand Creek Massacre. Facing the realities of histories, the horrors that humanity is willing to perpetuate upon itself, and then like suffering some kind of supernatural comeuppance from it. All kind of like ties together into this heady, scary thing, both grounded in reality and taken to that like extra narrative storytelling supernatural level. And I think this book does a really good job mixing like the impersonal horrors of history, the general anyone could be haunted, along with like this personal connective tie we might have to these elements. And this story does a great job being empathetic and seeing the horror on all sides of the issue. If you were the stereotypical white person whose family is usually the people who have done the bad thing, your ignorance on that matter is part of what is causing you to suffer in this story. And learning about it might change how you view your family and your history and maybe even yourself. Acknowledging that maybe you haven't been facing it not just because of white privilege, which is an issue that we could talk about too, but also just because you're ashamed, you're embarrassed, you're afraid of what that is, what that means for you and for your family. I like looking at that fear, looking at that little internal reflection, and I love that this book could acknowledge that. But also, this is a story that's very much centered on like Indigenous pain and atrocities committed against Indigenous people and what they might be suffering even after death as a result of that. So like, I love that we're showcasing that history, we're bringing it up and talking about it. I like that we're getting this sort of almost first-person perspective on these aspects of our history. And I think like Olivia is the right character to go on this journey with, because she does sort of feel this pain and feel this personal connection to all of the ghost stories that are kind of incorporated together into like the largest wrapper story, which wraps us up into like the most close and personal element of the story, and that's that Olivia got these powers a few years back due to the trauma of her sister's suicide. And before that, she was struggling with her sister, who was a recovering drug addict. They thought they had kicked that habit, and just when everyone thought they could go back to normal and things were in the clear, they find her sister dead in the room 904 at the Brown Palace, which feels like such a senseless tragedy that even all these years later, they're still trying to make sense of it. Like, why did she go get help for addiction? Why did she stay clean and then go to this building to kill herself? And that's like sort of part of the mystery that we're unraveling. I don't want to spoil too much of it, but that significant trauma of losing her sister like that, feeling a certain level of responsibility and not responding to the call when her sister called her for help, is what made Olivia able to see ghosts and spirits when she hadn't been able to previously. Dealing with this, getting to the point where she is like this competent, powerful medium, took her a matter of years, forced her to change careers entirely and like live an entirely different life than the life she had planned for and dreamed about. Having that kind of complete transformation, something like that that just wrecks your life entirely, is horrific all in its own way. Which kind of rolls me into number 2 character is King, because I think knowing all this information about Olivia and Olivia's story creates an immediate bond and connection between the main character and the reader. Olivia is really proud of what she's built, how she figured things out, where she is now, how far she has come. And as readers, we're really rooting for her and proud of her too. Also, this is a super personal story about Olivia's past, specifically between like the immediate loss of her father that caused her sister to go into an addiction spiral, the way her and her mother pulled her sister out of this, and then how 7 years ago her sister apparently killed herself for no reason at the Brown Hotel. All this time later, the Brown Palace is contacting Olivia and giving her more information about this apparent suicide and how it might not be exactly what it seems. Her sister might possibly be the victim of some kind of supernatural something. It looks like her mother is being set up to be the next potential victim of that thing if Olivia can't solve this problem. Like, this is really a journey only Olivia can go on. That close personal connection that we develop with Olivia, with her story, with her plight, with her stakes, is really what's driving this story and making us go forward. I think the story achieves excellent balance in this way, because even though this is a story I only want to go on with Olivia, and the stakes are incredibly high because it would solve why her sister was murdered and or committed suicide, it will protect her mother from facing a similar fate. There's also the larger wrapper that the Brown Palace has been killing Indigenous women once every 7 years in room 904 for over 100 years at this point in time. And that's all to say nothing of like the spirit world and the ghosts and settling things, and that's something we get a little bit of perspective back and forth on through some of the other ghosts that Olivia encounters. But it seems like what she is doing here will be important to like her spiritual family that sort of extends back to like these Indigenous roots in like a more amorphous kind of way than her immediate relationship to her sister and her mother. Rolling me into number 3, more poetic prose. I love this story. I thought it was a super well written, engaging book. It definitely has that like ease of reading kind of popcorn feel where you start and you just want to keep going. It's not a story with a lot of exposition and telling you this, telling you that. It expects you to pick things up or already know these things and kind of roll with it a little bit, which is my preferred method of story. So I was really in right away. But despite enjoying all of that, I wouldn't consider this novel particularly lyrical in its presentation. I don't think it was trying anything sort of like experimental in its prose or storytelling style. I don't really think it extended any metaphors or did anything like above and beyond what I would just consider very well crafted storytelling. Rolling us into number 4, elements of loneliness and longing. I kind of feel like The Haunting of Room 904 explores loneliness in a couple of interesting ways. Starting with Olivia, her heritage and experience sets her apart from like mainstream society. Because Olivia is considered a person of color, partially indigenous, white society does look at her as other. And also as a person who can see ghosts and who knows that the spirit world is real, can talk to the dead. That sort of sets her apart from like normal everyday society too, where that's sort of like an open question if you believe in ghosts or not. There's no solid proof. And even beyond that, Olivia breaks a lot of like standard conventions. Like she gets into relationships, but she's not currently intending to get married, nor does she think she'll ever want to get married. Her life goal is to live with her best friend forever and for them to be like lifelong platonic partners while maybe she also has some romances. And there's like nothing wrong with what she wants to do, who she is, what she's exploring. It just doesn't vibe with the mainstream expectation on pretty much all fronts and sort of like ends up ostracizing her and separating from like the day-to-day flow of like mainstream American life. And then on the other side of things, because she's only partially indigenous, because she can't necessarily tie her roots back to a specific tribe or prove which tribe she's from, because she wasn't raised in any one specific culture or like on a reservation or whatever, she doesn't have those strong cultural ties or like proof that she belongs in any one place, means that she owns all of these traditions she's practicing and none of them in some ways. It means when things are going well, X, Y, and Z groups wants to claim Olivia, and when Olivia's on the back foot, everyone is quick to reject her. It really leaves Olivia in sort of like a unique kind of drifting sort of position in like the sea of culture and society. And then in Olivia's interpersonal relationship, she's also kind of in a unique position because she is a medium, because she sees, senses, feels things that her friends don't. All in the same room, and when they're talking, sometimes she is experiencing something that they have no idea that's going on at all. And while she definitely makes effort to be included in the friendship group, her friends make effort to include her, they're not always communicating at the same level, the same kind of understanding, they're not always seeing the same thing at the same time, and this can leave her in like a very isolated, lonely position. I would say even within Olivia's family life, while she has a strong family connection, her and her mother are very close. It looks like before her sister passed, the two of them were also pretty close. There's also these barriers between them, at least in the beginning of the book, that they sort of have to overcome. You know, starting with I think as far back as when the family suddenly lost Olivia's father. Her mother and sister went into like a very deep mourning, and Olivia was obviously crushed by this loss too, but she sort of like had to keep going because someone in the family had to. And from that, her sister sort of spiraled into addiction and depression, and her mother like eventually pulled herself up out of that depression. The two of them came together to get the sister clean. And then I think when the sister died, that put a wedge between them too, because like the mother remembered that she couldn't fall apart again on Olivia, but she also was crushed. Olivia felt partially responsible for her sister's death because she didn't go that night when Nietzsche called asking for help. There's like these secrets and feelings of responsibility or culpability or like expectations of how they're supposed to carry on that sort of keep these two characters separated from each other. At least until Olivia's mom shows up at the Brown Palace and ends up in room 904 sort of signaling she's going to be the next sacrifice. And then the two of them show that they really are capable of this kind of communication and conversation when in a pinch. They like sort of align and come together, and the only thing that's really keeping Olivia isolated from her mom is her sense of responsibility and like a little bit of this hero complex, like she is the only one who can do anything to save her mother and she must do it because she's the only one who can. Honestly, I really appreciated this one moment of like isolation, loneliness, actually being able to solve that come together, because it sort of like shows even when you feel like you're adrift and alone, you can reach out to people, you can communicate with them, and you can have these moments of connection, like you can rebuild things that are lost. Bringing us into number 5, elements of humor human mortality. With ghost stories, you generally expect the ghost to be the ones doing the human mortality explanation heavy lifting. And I don't think that's the case in this particular story, because the ghosts seem to have this memory of their human life that was full and rich, and they also seem to be having some kind of afterlife experience that's just different than human life was, but it's still, in a lot of ways, what we would recognize as life. Instead, I think the element of human mortality really comes into play when we talk about Olivia and Nietzsche, because Nietzsche's suicide has cut Olivia off from her sister. Olivia dreams of this sisterhood connection. She has a lot of guilt over the fact that Nietzsche was alone in her last moment. She feels she could have saved Nietzsche if she had been there. There's a lot of unresolved questions, concerns, fears about Nietzsche's death. Like, was it a suicide? Was it a murder? If it's a suicide, why did she do it? There's this secret group that's sort of involved. We have to ask if those people sent her in to try and fix the supernatural problem, or if they sent her in intentionally knowing that she would be a sacrifice to the supernatural thing. It seems very much like the hard line here on the human mortality component is like, one minute you're here alive and interacting with people, and the next minute you're dead. And that death doesn't end your consciousness or your living, but it does end your interaction with all of those people. And it's sort of like coming to terms with that as the survivor of it in Olivia's case, or possibly coming to terms with their position if you're Nietzsche, and moving on into that next phase of afterlife. And I think the other way that we sort of talk about human mortality in this book is there is a supernatural something that is killing indigenous people, and they're doing it specifically because those people's lives are magic, because life is sacred. The act of killing, of taking those lives prematurely, is sort of like this energy that feeds and maintains the nefarious force. And I think that's a very interesting way to look at human mortality too. Even though this book is saying specifically indigenous people are magic and they have the magic and the white people don't, you could look at it in a more holistic way that all life is sacred and precious and everyone has this well tap of magic. You live your life on this magic, right? All the way until you die of old age. But if someone kills you in some kind of way, they're able to capture that while it's leaving you prematurely and utilize it for some other kind of presence. I haven't fully grasped all of the implications of it, but thinking that life is sacred and it is a gift and it is power all in and of itself. Murder is an unforgivable act, and then further on top of that, if you can murder in some kind of supernatural, ritualistic way, you can snatch that life from someone and use it for your own gains. That's all really interesting and asking us for nice, interesting kind of questions. Which rolls me into number 6, the supernatural element. This is a book about hauntings, possessed things, supernatural items, golems that are coming to life and moving around of their own volition and will. There is really no questioning that there is a world beyond our world, that there are magical forces and supernatural beings and possibly gods and realms and all kinds of stuff at play. It is generally what I would consider a soft magical system, with the most hard magical elements being from Olivia's ex-boyfriend, who's really into Jewish mysticism, and he gives some more hard and fast rules specifically around the Judeo-mystic part of the story. I think it's possible that there is also some more hard rules on the indigenous part, and I am just less familiar with indigenous lore, so I don't understand the hard fast rules there, or what's a deal breaker and what's not. One thing I did really like about this presentation of the supernatural is this is sort of walking in this interesting liminal space between a magical realism kind of genre and a only insiders know about the magic and there's just a bunch of mundanes who are oblivious to it kind of realm. Because if this were magical realism, then everyone would know that magic is real, ghosts are real, and it would just be a fact of life that people accepted like they accept the sky is blue. And that's not the case. But if this was like a secret, we're keeping it for mundanes kind of thing, there'd be more work involved in like keeping haunted objects outside of the realm of the public, or like trying to hush up these kind of incidents, or being like less sharing with what they're doing or why they're doing it. That Olivia can speak to the dead, how she came into her power, all of this kind of stuff is not secret from anyone for any reason. Sometimes people believe her and sometimes they don't. She just goes on and tells people what she does, why she does it, why it's important, and other people who are experiencing supernatural feel free to talk about it. The Brown Palace as a place and like a management team believes in ghosts and supernatural. They're like actually actively trying to prevent this haunting thing that's happening. You know, it's a lot more out in the open, talked about and accepted than I think it is here in our world, and certainly than it would be in like a magic is secret kind of world. But at the same time, there are people who actively disbelieve in magic and the ghost, the haunting, possession. There's one reporter in particular who seems to be out to get Olivia. And I guess it's unclear whether or not she believes Olivia is a medium, but I tend to believe not only does she hate Olivia, but she also thinks Olivia is a grifter and doesn't believe in any supernatural anything. In part because if Olivia was supernatural, it means that she is not capable of doing supernatural things, and that would make her jealous, and she's like already jealous of Olivia for a whole bunch of other reasons. This would be like one more subconscious motivation. It ends up feeling like a nice middle ground, a little bit more accepting than our world, but not without the same kind of problems a supernatural ghost hunter would have in our world too. Rolling into number 7, questioning characters' mental health and mental reality. So for the purpose of this prompt, I'm going to say no. From a Gothic perspective, the point of someone questioning their mental health and mental reality is meant to make the reader unsure of whether these are ghosts or hallucinations, or maybe like a criminal in a mask trying to scare you off. And it's also meant to make us wonder about the reliability of our narrator. And I never wonder about Olivia's reliability as a narrator. I think she sees ghosts. I think what she sees is true and real. I think she has positive impact in the world. There's nothing that shakes that up for me. That said, the reporter I was talking about before definitely questions Olivia's mental health, mental reality, and suggests that she is a fraud or a grifter, or specifically doing this to like cover up her involvement in her sister's murder. And all of this comes to a head that gets police involved and gets like the larger society as a whole around her to doubt Olivia in a way that they hadn't previously. It's a great device for this book. Like, it creates this climactic moment where the general public at large is against Olivia when time is most of the essence and she most needs to solve this thing because she's running out of lead time to save her mother's life. And it adds like tension, stakes, and like an extra element of opposition that I think is really nice in the novel. But like having a generic faceless mob of doubters who might get in Olivia's way is not the same as us considering if Olivia secretly was in on Nietzsche's suicide, or even if people close to Olivia are using her as like some kind of shield for their participation in Nietzsche's suicide. Rolling me into number 8, making use of local folklore, legend, and myth. The titular haunting in room 904 is a real thing in Brown Palace. Like, for starters, Brown Palace is a real hotel in operation in Denver, Colorado. And room 904 really is where Louise Hill lived from 1944 to 1955 on her death. The Sacred 36 is really a thing that she founded. The nonsense, nautical-themed bar in Brown Palace is real. And of course, the Sand Creek Massacre that one of the ghost references is also real. I don't know about everything that was covered in the history, and certainly elements of this history have been fictionalized, exaggerated, changed, put together in a way to fit this story, but it's definitely taking real legends and histories around Denver, Colorado, and warping it into a Gothic narrative. Further, it seems like they're taking some indigenous practice and indigenous lore and combining that into this story. I know they're taking some classic Jewish mysticism and adding that in as a flavor as well. So I would say they're definitely using mythology as well as local folklore and legend in the story to max effect. Which rolls me into the last element, number 9, a strong sense of place. I would say that the city of Denver is very well characterized here, starting with the Brown Palace, which is a real place in Denver, and moving on to like some other landmarks that I know exist in Denver, as well as like the Sand Creek Massacre, which has its own national park, about 100 miles outside of Denver, I believe. And like even a little bit, the way the one reporter gets to write all these editorials in the paper and seems to have the ear of the local people and stuff makes Denver feel like a cohesive, real place. I certainly think the story could only be told here and that there's a sense of character to it. Brown Palace, especially room 904, has an aura about it that's like palpable and in a sense its own character. So definitely I would give it the Gothic point and the strong sense of place, making the place sort of its own ominous character, which means the haunting of room 904 has 6 of the 9 Gothic principles, making it Gothic in the extreme. I really love this story. I think it gives you a little window into like some practices and culture bits that you wouldn't usually get. It reminds us of histories that, like, even though I had learned about the Sand Creek Massacre, it's something I did in my own time. It's not something the educational system taught me. This little deep dive into some basic Denver history, which I had never known and wouldn't know without this book, was also like a lot of fun. Not to mention, I think the hauntings were really creative and different. The take on ghosts was like a fun twist on what's classically done in Gothic literature. And there's 2 subplot chunks that I didn't even talk about at all in this review, but were definitely a lot of fun to witness on page, and I think most people would enjoy. This would definitely fall more into a Gothic thriller, Gothic mystery than just like a generic goth or a Gothic romance. This was a little bit more atmosphere and a little less moody ennui than I usually like to see in Gothic literature, but it definitely has like that palpable feeling of human mortality, the end is near, and like people coming out of mourning or like trying to triumph over death and like continue to reaffirm life. And I really like all of those aspects in a Gothic work. But talk to me in those comments down below. What is the most Gothic thing you've read recently? And if you've got this far into the video, the secret emoji is a gravestone emoji. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep reading.